The monsters you know are not the ones your ancestors feared. Their stories are a living chronicle of the human soul. In this journey, you will gain a powerful new lens to see our entire history reflected in the beasts we create. We will uncover why a creature of pure terror in one century becomes a noble guardian in the next, and what hidden fears turned a mermaid from a storm omen into a romantic icon. The evolution of legendary creatures is a map of our collective psyche. What legendary being do you feel has changed the most from its original tale? A myth begins not as a story, but as an answer to a question no one could yet solve. Why does the sun rise and set? What causes thunder to crash across the sky? Where do we go when we die? These were the first seeds from which legends grew, giving form to the formless and voice to the silent forces of nature. Think of myths not as simple fables, but as the living, breathing consciousness of a culture. They are a collective dream, rich with symbols that helped our ancestors navigate a world full of wonder and danger. These stories provided the earliest frameworks for law, for morality, and for our place in the cosmos. The creatures that inhabit these tales are far more than mere beasts to be feared. They are complex symbols, vessels for our deepest anxieties and highest aspirations. Take the serpent, a figure that appears in countless traditions. In one culture, it might be a villain, a symbol of deceit and chaos. In another, it is a sacred being representing healing, wisdom, and the endless cycle of death and rebirth. This inherent duality is the key, because myths serve a vital function. They cannot remain frozen in time. They must adapt to serve new generations, to answer new questions. When we understand that these narratives are functional and deeply symbolic, their incredible malleability across centuries suddenly makes perfect sense. They are made of a special kind of clay, one that is always ready to be reshaped by the next pair of hands. And one of the most powerful forces that reshapes this clay is the meeting of two different worlds through cultural exchange. A merchant's tale told under desert stars never remains just one story for long. The real magic of mythmaking happened at the crossroads of the ancient world, in bustling ports and along dusty trade routes like the Silk Road. Imagine a Persian traveler describing the simurgh, a magnificent, wise bird large enough to carry an elephant. A Chinese listener familiar with the fenghuang, a divine phoenix symbolizing harmony, might nod in understanding, blending the images in their mind. The next time they told the story, their fenghuang might carry a new echo of that simurgh's immense wisdom and power. This is cultural synthesis, the quiet, constant process where stories mingle and monsters are remade. It was not a clash of titans but a conversation, a shared dream between cultures. The result is often a hybrid creature, a being born from this creative collision. Consider the Greek chimera, a fire-breathing nightmare of a lion, a goat, and a serpent. This was not a random assembly of parts, but a powerful symbol of the foreign and the terrifying, perhaps inspired by tales and art from the East that filtered into Greek consciousness. These crossroads acted as a furnace of the imagination, forging entirely new beings from the raw materials of old fears and wonders. No mythology ever grew in true isolation. Each was a living tapestry, constantly being rewoven with threads borrowed from its neighbors. And once these new, blended forms took shape, they needed a new kind of anchor to survive the journey through time, an anchor provided by the revolutionary power of the written word. But the voice of a storyteller fades on the wind while ink endures. The invention of writing was a revolution for myth, a double-edged sword that both saved stories from oblivion and froze them in time. In the fluid world of oral tradition, a dragon could change its shape with every telling. its nature shifting to suit the needs of the village or the mood of the bard. Once committed to parchment, that same creature was captured, its description fixed. This created a powerful new concept, the authoritative version. A scribe hunched over a manuscript in a silent monastery, meticulously copying a bestiary, now held immense power. He might intentionally sharpen the description of a basilisk, transforming it from a strange serpent into a definitive symbol of the devil, its gaze not just deadly but inherently evil. Writing introduced the possibility of deliberate alteration, of scholarly interpretation and editorial license. A creature could be systematically redefined to align with a new religious doctrine or a king's political agenda. This tension between preservation and transformation became a new engine for change. The written record became a new, tangible origin point, one that could be referenced, debated, and deliberately amended by later generations who saw the world through a different lens. And one of the most powerful of these new lenses was the unwavering gaze of organized faith. A new god demands a new pantheon, and the rise of a dominant faith often meant the systematic rewriting of the old ones. This was not a simple erasure of pagan beliefs, but a deliberate and powerful act of ideological repurposing. Ancient symbols were stripped of their original context and infused with a meaning that served a new theological order. The horned god Cernunnos, once a revered Celtic lord of the forest, animals, and abundance, provides a stark example. His powerful visage, representing the untamed vitality of nature, was methodically recast. In the new Christian framework, horns became a symbol not of primal power but of malevolence. The god of the wild was reimagined as the devil, a tempter, and the very embodiment of sin. This transformation was a masterstroke of symbolic warfare. It drained the old sacred symbols of their power and made them serve as warnings for the new faith. Religious art and texts became the primary weapons in this battle for the human imagination. Saints' legends were filled with tales of them triumphing over dragon-like beasts that symbolized pagan disbelief. The vibrant, complex spirits of local springs and groves were demoted to minor demons or troublesome fairies. This demonstrates that mythology is never just a collection of stories. It is a battleground where competing worldviews fight for the soul of a culture. And just as religious authority sought to command these symbolic creatures, so too did the secular power of kings and emperors. A king's power rests not only on an army, but on the stories his people believed. When a sovereign chose the dragon as their personal emblem, they were performing a profound act of symbolic theft. This creature, once a primal force of chaos and untamed nature, was captured and placed upon a royal seal. On the Welsh flag, it became a defiant symbol of national identity. For the Chinese emperor seated upon the dragon throne, it represented heavenly mandate, wisdom, and absolute authority. The message was clear: the ruler was not just a man, but the human incarnation of the land's most powerful spiritual force. This political appropriation systematically tamed the mythic wild, transforming beings of awe into polished symbols of state control. Across the globe, the same pattern unfolded. Coats of arms became a gallery of domesticated legends. The griffin, with its lion's body and eagle's head, was no longer a distant marvel guarding gold in some desolate mountain pass. It now stood for the very earthly virtues of courage and vigilance, stamped on a noble family's shield. The lion, a universal emblem of raw strength, was leashed to represent royal dignity and justice. These symbols were not chosen at random. Each was a deliberate piece of propaganda, a visual shorthand that communicated a ruler's divine right and unassailable strength to a largely illiterate populace. But how do you make sure these carefully crafted symbols reach every subject in the kingdom? The answer lies in the art that adorned the public square and the stories told in the common tongue. That storyteller by the fire held a power no scribe could match. Before printing presses and bound books, the human voice and memory were the living libraries of our myths. The oral tradition was not a rigid recitation but a vibrant, breathing performance. A skilled teller would look at their audience, sensing their mood and their fears. On a cold, dark winter night, the dragon in the story might be a more terrifying beast, its breath a blizzard of frost. During a summer festival, that same creature could become a comical trickster, outwitted by a clever farmer. The core of the myth remained, but its details were clay in the storyteller's hands, molded to fit the moment. This was a deeply collaborative act. The gasps, the questions, the eager silence of the listeners all fed back into the performance, guiding the teller to emphasize one detail over another. This is why you find such wild variations in the oldest legends. In one village, a water spirit is a beautiful maiden who lures the unwary. Just over the mountain, she is a wrinkled hag who guards the river's bounty. Both are the same being, reshaped by local geography and the specific needs of the community that told her tale. This fluidity kept mythology alive and immediately useful. It was a tool for teaching, for warning, and for binding people together. But this beautiful, chaotic flexibility was about to meet its greatest challenge, a technology that would capture these living stories and pin them to the page like butterflies in a case. The age of print was dawning. A single sheet of printed text could silence 1,000 local storytellers. Johannes Gutenberg's press did not just reproduce books, it began to forge a unified imagination for entire nations. For the first time, a description of a vampire from a German chapbook could be read by audiences in France and England, presenting one specific version as the truth. This was a werewolf no longer shaped by the fears of a particular forest, but a creature defined by ink and paper, its attributes fixed. The old, fluid world of oral tradition, where a monster might be benevolent in one valley and murderous in the next, began to recede before this tide of standardized narrative. Mass-produced bestiaries and cheaply printed pamphlets created a new kind of authority, the canonical monster. The vampire was no longer just a bloated corpse from Slavic folklore. It was now a suave aristocrat with a cloak, an image that would eventually crystallize in later literature. This was a double-edged sword. Knowledge of these legendary beings was democratized, reaching people who had never heard such tales, but the incredible diversity of regional variants was slowly smoothed over. The printed page created a new baseline, a rigid template from which all future stories would now sprout. A dragon's appearance became less a matter of local legend and more a reference to a widely circulated illustration. This process of standardization did not kill the evolution of myth, but it certainly placed it in a new kind of cage, one made of paper and popular consensus. And from this cage, a new kind of creator would soon arrive to pick the lock, armed not with a pen, but with a paintbrush and a camera. Painters and sculptors gave our nightmares a face we could never forget. Before the mass production of images, the visual identity of a monster was fluid, shaped by the descriptions of poets and the whispers of storytellers. But an artist's brushstroke could cement a single, terrifying vision for centuries. Gaze upon the intricate panels of Hieronymus Bosch, where the torments of the afterlife are populated by a menagerie of impossible beings, part insect, part human, part machine. These were not illustrations of existing tales so much as entirely new contributions to mythology, visual inventions that became as real as any written legend. Similarly, the grotesque gargoyle leering from a cathedral gutter was more than decoration. It was a sermon in stone, a physical reminder of the demons that waited beyond the church walls. These artistic creations carried immense authority. If a renowned painter depicted a dragon with bat-like wings and a serpentine neck, that specific image began to overwrite all others in the public mind. The creature's evolution was no longer just a matter of its changing role in a story. It was now about its increasingly fixed appearance, an appearance dictated by the skill, the style, and often the specific commissions of the artist. A patron paying for a grand mural might demand that the dragon symbolize a defeated enemy, altering its color or posture to suit a political message. This visual codification locked legends into a new kind of form, one that was breathtakingly vivid and surprisingly rigid. Then, a new technology arrived that would not just capture a single moment, but would set these solidified creatures into motion, bringing them to life in the flickering light of a cinema screen. The flickering projector of a cinema became the new campfire for the entire world. In the 20th century, the motion picture did not just tell stories, it forged modern mythology with an immediacy and power that oral tradition and print could never match. A film like King Kong was more than a tale of a giant ape. It was a monumental tragedy that made you feel for the monster. Godzilla was not merely a dinosaur from the sea. It was a walking, roaring metaphor for the atomic age, a creature born from humanity's own technological hubris. The classic Universal Monsters series took creatures from the shadows of folklore and gave them Hollywood star power. The vampire, once a bloated, peasant corpse in Slavic tales, was utterly remade by Bela Lugosi's hypnotic performance. With a sweeping cape and a Transylvanian accent, he became Dracula, a charismatic and tragic aristocrat. Cinema added something entirely new to the legend, layers of personality, motivation, and a sympathetic glamour. You were not just told the monster was dangerous, you saw the terror in its eyes, you heard the loneliness in its growl. This was achieved through the magic of spectacular visual effects, making the impossible feel tangibly real on a scale that fireside stories could never conjure. For millions of people, these filmic interpretations did not just adapt the old myths, they erased them. The movie monster became the definitive version, the new origin point in the global imagination. Hollywood's distribution network ensured that a creature born in Japanese cinema, like Godzilla, could become a household name in America and Europe overnight. This demonstrated the silver screen's unparalleled power to not only reshape our legends, but to standardize them across cultures, creating international icons from localized fears. And just as these cinematic beasts learned to walk, a new digital landscape was forming, one that would give them a playground without any borders at all. A novelist's pen can be the most powerful tool of all, for it does not just retell a myth, it dissects it. In the 20th and 21st centuries, literature became a vibrant laboratory where legendary creatures were taken apart and put back together with entirely new components. Authors like J.R.R. Tolkien, J.K. Rowling, and Neil Gaiman stopped treating mythology as a museum to be visited and started using it as a language to be spoken anew. They engaged in a conscious act of mythopoeia, the deliberate creation of mythic frameworks. Tolkien's elves stand as a prime example. He stripped away the tiny, winged, mischievous sprites of Victorian fairy tales and rebuilt them as the Eldar, a race of tall, majestic, and deeply sorrowful beings, ancient and burdened by the weight of their own long history. This was not borrowing, it was a fundamental reimagining that granted these creatures a new kind of soul and gravitas. This literary movement is defined by its willingness to ask profound questions of the old stories. What if the monster was not evil, but simply acting on an instinct we fail to understand? What does the world look like from the dragon's perspective, high in its mountain hoard? Neil Gaiman's American Gods explores what happens to deities like Odin and Anansi when they are forgotten in a modern world, turning them into complex, often pitiable characters. J.K. Rowling populated her wizarding world with creatures like hippogriffs and the Strauss, beings with their own intricate rules of behavior and respect, teaching lessons about prejudice and the perception of danger. This intellectual reinvention treats ancient myths as a deep well of source material, not for simple replication, but for the construction of new, nuanced narratives that reflect contemporary concerns about power, identity, and morality. By giving old bones new flesh and a complex inner life, these authors did more than just write stories. They prepared these legendary beings for their most radical transformation yet, a journey into the interactive and endlessly malleable realms of the digital world. A digital sword feels heavy in your hand, and the roar of a dragon is not a distant sound but a personal threat. Video games have transformed our relationship with legendary creatures from one of observation to one of direct participation. You are no longer a passive listener to a story about a griffin. You are the one creeping through its nest, studying its flight patterns, and deciding whether to draw your bow. This interactivity demands a new kind of reality from our myths. A creature cannot simply look terrifying. Its entire existence must be plausible within the game's world. The designers of epic sagas like The Witcher or God of War function as modern myth makers, constructing elaborate bestiaries that detail a monster's diet, social structure, migratory habits, and even its relationship with other magical beings. The vampire is no longer just a generic nightwalker. It is a higher vampire with a complex society, ancient grudges, and a strict code of honor that the player must learn and navigate. This internal logic gives these digital beings a depth and consistency that makes them feel truly alive. The most profound change, however, lies in the power of choice. In a game, you might be tasked with slaying a werewolf, only to discover through your own investigation that it is a cursed blacksmith, a victim of a tragedy. You are then presented with a moral dilemma. Do you follow your contract and kill the beast, or do you seek a cure and spare the man? Your decision crafts your own personal version of the legend, a unique interpretation that exists only in your playthrough. This dynamic, participatory relationship is the culmination of centuries of mythological evolution, turning the audience from listeners into active co-authors of the tale. The monster is no longer a fixed symbol. Its meaning is now shaped by your own actions and ethics within the digital frontier. The monster has shifted from a demonic tempter to a scientific consequence. Our newest legendary beings are born not in cursed forests, but in laboratories and nuclear test sites. They are creatures of our own making, physical manifestations of our deep-seated environmental angst. The quintessential example is Godzilla, the king of the monsters who first rose from the Pacific depths in the 1950s. He was not a god or a demon, but a direct result of atomic testing, a prehistoric creature mutated and awakened by humanity's most destructive power. His rampage across Tokyo was not mindless evil, it was a seismic parable. He was the ocean itself given form and fury, a walking, roaring indictment of the nuclear age. This was a new kind of myth for a new kind of fear, a fear not of the dark but of the invisible fallout from our own technology. The kaiju genre that followed, filled with colossal beasts like Mothra and Rodan, continued this theme, portraying nature not as a spirit to be appeased but as a colossal force fighting back against pollution, exploitation, and ecological imbalance. The monster became a symbol of the planet's immune response. This narrative thread has only strengthened in recent decades. Our stories are now populated by chimeras of a different sort, creatures born from genetic experimentation and bioengineering. They are the mutated animals, the hybrid horrors that escape from a corporate lab, reflecting our acute fear of tampering with the very code of life. These are not the magical hybrids of the ancient chimera, but plausible scientific nightmares. They force us to confront a terrifying question: what happens when our curiosity outpaces our control? The horror is no longer supernatural, it is systemic, the unintended result of a process set in motion by human hands. This evolution marks a profound change in the monster's function. It has become an ecological warning, a dramatic stand-in for climate change, mass extinction, and genetic pollution. We are no longer scared of what lurks in the unknown wilderness. We are terrified of what we have unleashed from our own test tubes and reactors. And as the monster's origin changed, so too did its fundamental role in the story, transforming from a villain to be slain into something far more complex and morally challenging. The monster's heart is no longer just a target, but a mystery to be understood. Contemporary storytelling has performed a remarkable act of narrative alchemy, turning the antagonist into the anti-hero. We no longer watch from the safety of the village walls. We are invited inside the creature's lair to see the world through its eyes. Anne Rice did not simply write about vampires. She gave them a voice steeped in centuries of existential dread and profound loneliness. Her creatures, like Louis and Lestat, are philosophers cursed with eternal life, their predatory nature a burden that forces them to grapple with morality, faith, and the slow erosion of their own humanity. This is a far cry from the mindless, blood-drinking revenant of folklore. Similarly, the classic fairy tale villain Maleficent was completely reimagined not as a figure of pure spite, but as a betrayed and wounded protector, her cruel actions born from deep personal trauma. This shift in perspective is more than a plot device. It reflects a profound psychological movement in our culture, a desire to understand the root of darkness rather than simply vanquish it. It forces an uncomfortable but vital question upon the audience. Who is the real monster? Is it the beast acting on its nature, or the fearful mob that refuses to see anything but a threat? This narrative democratization shatters the simple binaries of good and evil that once defined our oldest myths. The creature becomes a mirror, and in its reflection we are forced to confront our own complexities, our own capacity for prejudice, and the societal flaws that create outsiders. This newfound sympathy often requires a direct confrontation with the gendered origins of these legends, peeling back centuries of narrative bias to find a more nuanced truth. For centuries, the siren's song was not her own, but a warning crafted by men about the dangers of female allure. She was a lesson, not a person. This deep gendering of the monstrous is one of the oldest and most persistent threads in our mythic tapestry. Female figures like the harpy, a screeching embodiment of storm winds that snatched away what men held dear, or the lamia, a child-stealing serpent woman born from a tale of jealous revenge, were almost universally designed as cautionary symbols. They represented a primal male anxiety about female power, specifically the mysterious and feared power of female sexuality and independence. To encounter such a being was to face a temptation that could unravel a hero's destiny, reducing these complex potential deities to one-dimensional agents of ruin. But a story once told can always be retold with a different intent. The modern reinterpretation of these figures is one of the most radical evolutions in our entire journey. Contemporary storytellers are not merely tweaking these legends, they are performing a profound act of narrative archaeology, digging down through layers of patriarchal bias to unearth a different being altogether. The siren is no longer just a lure to shipwreck. In recent novels and films, she is a guardian of her oceanic territory, her beautiful voice a weapon to defend her home from invading sailors, not to beguile them. She is granted motive, history, and a right to her own domain. The harpy is reimagined from a foul pestilence into a majestic, if fearsome, protector of the natural world, her talons and shrieks a righteous defense of sacred spaces. This transformation is not a simple cosmetic change. It is a direct reflection of our society's slow, painful, and ongoing reassessment of gender roles and power dynamics. By applying a feminist lens to these ancient tales, we are actively reclaiming them. We are asking whose fear originally shaped this monster and for whose benefit. The answer almost always points to a culture seeking to control and demonize the feminine that existed outside of traditional, subservient roles. This re-examination adds a crucial and urgent layer of social commentary to the creature's journey, forcing us to see the myth not as a universal truth, but as a historical document of societal values. And if the nature of the monster is being so fundamentally questioned, can the hero who stands against it remain unchanged? The hero's shining armor sometimes blinds us to the blood on his sword. For generations, the classic quest was a simple equation. A brave knight defeats a monstrous guardian to rescue a princess or claim a treasure. This narrative was the bedrock of our myths, a story we told ourselves about order triumphing over chaos. But a troubling question now echoes from the dragon's lair. What if that knight is not a liberator but a thief? What if the dragon is not a hoarder but a warden? This is the profound subversion at the heart of our modern myths, a direct challenge to the colonialist and exploitative undertones baked into the very structure of the hero's journey. The quest itself is put on trial. We see this in tales where the so-called monster is the rightful protector of a sacred grove, a last bastion of ancient magic, or a dwindling natural resource. The human invaders, cloaked in the language of heroism and progress, are revealed as greedy despoilers. The dragon is no longer a symbol of greed, but a conservationist. Its hoard is not gold, but the fragile ecosystem it has sworn to defend. This narrative flip forces the audience into a deeply uncomfortable position. We are conditioned to cheer for the slayer, but now we are asked to mourn the slain. The true villain of the story shifts from the beast in the cave to the systemic hunger for conquest and extraction that sent the hero on his path in the first place. This critical lens does not just re-evaluate the monster, it dissects the hero's very identity. His glory is recast as genocide, his victory as a profound cultural and ecological loss. This deconstruction is a powerful form of narrative justice, using the familiar architecture of the old stories to deliver a potent critique of the power structures they once upheld. The legend is turned inside out, and we are forced to wonder how many of our oldest heroes were, in fact, the original villains. The dragon's journey reveals a creature shattered into 1,000 cultural mirrors. In the beginning, there was not a beast but a goddess. The Babylonian epic Enuma Elish tells of Tiamat, the primordial mother, a being of salt water and chaos who gave birth to the gods themselves. She was the formless, creative void, a dragon not of fire but of the abyssal ocean. Yet when her children rebelled, she became the ultimate antagonist, the chaos that must be slain by the new god Marduk to establish cosmic order. Her body was literally carved up to form the heavens and the earth. Here, the dragon is the universe in its raw, untamed state. But travel westward and forward in time to medieval Europe, and this cosmic force has been radically diminished. The dragon is no longer a creator but a destroyer. It is Satan himself, coiled around the tree of knowledge in countless illuminations. It is the embodiment of greed, hoarding gold and virgins in a cave, a blight upon the land that must be purged by a saint like George or a knight like Siegfried. Its death is not a tragedy, but a necessary act of purification, a victory of holy order over pagan chaos. Now turn your gaze to the east. In China, the lung dragon is a divine and benevolent force. It controls the life-giving rains, ensuring bountiful harvests. It is a symbol of imperial authority, wisdom, and ultimate good fortune. This is not a monster to be slain, but a celestial power to be revered and appeased. How can one archetype hold such violently opposing meanings? The answer lies in the soil. In the rain-dependent agricultural societies of East Asia, a creature that commanded water was a god. In the conflict-ridden, faith-divided landscapes of medieval Europe, a creature representing untamed wilderness and older pagan beliefs became the perfect symbol for the enemy of the one true church. The dragon's nature was never fixed. It was a blank canvas upon which every culture painted its greatest fears or its highest hopes. Modern fantasy writers saw this fractured history not as a problem but as a palette. They began to stitch the pieces back together, creating dragons of breathtaking complexity. J.R.R. Tolkien gave us Smaug, a being of immense intelligence and avarice, a classic Western hoarder, yet one whose cunning speech makes him strangely compelling. George R.R. Martin's dragons in Game of Thrones are neither wholly good nor evil. They are living weapons, symbols of raw power whose allegiance determines the fate of kingdoms. These modern interpretations embrace the moral ambiguity, forcing us to see the dragon not as a simple symbol, but as a person with motives, history, and a right to exist. This single creature's evolution proves that a legend is not a monolith, but a conversation spanning millennia. Now compare this sprawling, externalized symbol with a being born from the most intimate of human fears, a creature that lives not in a cave but inside us all. The howl that echoes through the werewolf's tale is the sound of our own inner conflict. Unlike the dragon, a force of external nature, the monster here is us, or at least a part of us we can never fully escape. In its earliest forms, the werewolf was a stark lesson in losing control. Medieval folklore painted it as a divine punishment, a curse inflicted upon a sinner that forced them to become the beast they were inside. This was a literal, terrifying embodiment of the chaos that threatened to consume civilized life. The man-wolf was an outcast, a warning of what happened when you strayed from the path of community and God. The horror was not just the claws and the fangs, but the complete surrender of the human soul to its basest instincts. Then, a new science turned its gaze inward. The psychoanalytic theories of the 20th century did not dismiss the beast. They simply relocated its lair from the haunted forest to the human subconscious. The werewolf became the ultimate metaphor for the idea, for the raging sea of repressed desires, aggression, and primal urges that civilization forces us to bottle up. The full moon was no longer a celestial trigger for a curse, but a poetic symbol for the moments when our carefully constructed walls grow thin, and the savage self we keep locked away tries to break its chains. The monster was no longer a punishment from God, but a fundamental part of the human psyche that we all must learn to manage. This internalization of the myth reflected our growing cultural obsession with plumbing the depths of our own mind. But our anxiety soon took a more clinical turn. In our modern era, the curse has been re-diagnosed as a condition. The bite of the werewolf is less a supernatural mark and more like the transmission of a virus. The transformation is described with the language of epidemiology, a contagious pathogen that alters the victim's very biology. This shift mirrors our very real, pervasive fears of pandemics and the invisible threats that can rewrite our genetic identity. The struggle is no longer between man and demon, but between a person and their own body, a narrative that resonates deeply in a world preoccupied with health, immunity, and the secrets hidden in our DNA. And where does this modern, medicalized beast find a home? Often in the intricate pack structures of urban fantasy. Here, the werewolf is rarely a lone monster. It finds belonging, purpose, and a strict code of conduct within a pack. This new social framework allows the myth to explore powerful themes of community versus the individual, the weight of ancient traditions in a modern world, and the thin line between protective loyalty and tribal violence. The pack is a mirror for our own desperate search for identity and connection in an increasingly fragmented society. The werewolf's entire evolution, from cursed sinner to psychological archetype to a patient in a biological drama, is a direct reflection of our endlessly changing answer to one haunting question: where does the civilized human end and the wild animal begin? That same question of transformation echoes in the shifting form of a very different creature, one who rules not the forest but the unforgiving sea. Her song was never a love ballad but a funeral dirge. Long before she dreamed of walking on land, the mermaid was a creature of pure, chilling dread. In the cold coastal villages of the British Isles and across the stormy waters of the North Atlantic, to see her was to see your own death warrant. A mermaid sighting with her mirror and comb was a direct omen of a coming tempest, a promise that the sea would soon claim more lives. She was not a person, but a personification of the ocean's cruel and unforgiving nature, a beautiful face atop a force that could shatter your ship and pull you into the abyss without a second thought. Her haunting melody was not an invitation, but a lure into the crushing depths. This was a myth born from the genuine, daily terror of those who worked the sea, a way to give a name and a form to the inexplicable storms that rose from a calm horizon. So how did this agent of doom become the wistful heroine of a fairy tale? The answer lies in a fundamental shift in our relationship with the wild. The Romantic era of the 18th and 19th centuries did not see untamed nature as a threat to be conquered, but as a source of sublime beauty and profound emotion. The mysterious depths of the ocean were reimagined not as a hellish void, but as a realm of lost wonders and poetic solitude. The mermaid was the perfect vessel for this new feeling. Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid completed her transformation. In his story, she is no longer a predator. She is a tragic figure, defined by an impossible longing for a soul and a love that exists in a world she can never truly join. Her pain is not about drowning sailors, but about her own existential yearning. The sea is no longer just a grave, it is a gilded cage from which she desperately wishes to escape. This narrative pivot was monumental. It took a symbol of external danger and turned it inward, making the monster a mirror for our own feelings of isolation, unrequited love, and the search for identity. This romanticized version was then polished to a brilliant sheen by Disney, cementing her as an icon of innocent romance and adventure for a global audience. Yet even this beloved figure continues to evolve. In our current century, the mermaid is finding a new voice as a guardian of her domain. Environmental campaigns and modern stories often depict her not as a lure or a lovelorn princess, but as a spirit of the sea, deeply threatened by the pollution and over-exploitation of the oceans. She has become an ambassador for the fragile ecosystem she represents, her song now a warning cry about plastic-filled waters and dying coral reefs. Her journey from omen to objective pity to ecological advocate charts the course of our own changing conscience, reflecting our move from fearing nature to romanticizing it, to finally understanding our urgent duty to protect it. This aquatic evolution shows that no legend is safe from the tides of human progress, and from the sunlit, mysterious waves, our gaze must now turn toward a much darker and more intimate frontier, the restless shadow of the grave itself. The grave is a surprisingly porous border in the human imagination. Long before the vampire wore a cape or haunted a castle, it was a much more local and visceral terror. In the rural villages of Eastern Europe, the vampire was not a count but a neighbor, a recently deceased member of the community who refused to stay put. This folkloric revenant was a bloated, ruddy-faced corpse, a far cry from the gaunt aristocrat we know today. It was a peasant, often suspected of sin or dying without last rites, who would rise from its grave to stalk its own family and livestock, spreading disease and misfortune. The fear was intimate, a violation of the natural order within the tight-knit bonds of village life. The prescribed remedies were equally brutal and communal, involving staking, decapitation, or the burning of the body. This was a monster born from a pre-scientific misunderstanding of decomposition, but more profoundly from the primal fear that death was not a final release. It was the anxiety that a troubled soul could cling to its old haunts, poisoning the well and sickening the children it once knew. Then the 19th century arrived, and with it, a new kind of fear. Bram Stoker's Dracula did not merely record a legend, he reinvented it for the modern age. His Count was no peasant revenant. He was an aristocrat, a seductive nobleman from the mysterious East, corrupt, powerful, and brimming with a dangerous, forbidden sexuality. Stoker's genius was to take a folk monster and arm it with the trappings of a decaying nobility, making it a symbol of both ancient power and a very modern anxiety about the corruption of blood and virtue. This vampire was not a local problem to be solved with a village stake, but an invasive force that threatened an entire empire, a dark inversion of the British gentleman. He was the ultimate outsider, and his monstrousness was intertwined with his allure. The 20th and 21st centuries have only accelerated this transformation, molding the vampire to fit our newest preoccupations. In an era of pandemics, the vampire's bite became a potent metaphor for the silent, blood-borne spread of disease, echoing the social fears surrounding crises like AIDS. Then, in a stunning narrative reversal, the monster became the protagonist. From Anne Rice's Lestat to the brooding heroes of modern fantasy, the vampire is now a romantic figure, a tortured soul eternally wrestling with its own nature. It has become a symbol for the marginalized, the outsider who must hide their true self to survive in a hostile world. Its struggle is no longer about spreading plague, but about seeking belonging, navigating eternal life, and retaining humanity in the face of a monstrous hunger. The vampire's entire evolution, from a bloated corpse in a village graveyard to a charismatic, complex anti-hero, is a perfect mirror. It reflects our shifting fears from communal decay to sexual anxiety, from disease to the very nature of identity itself. This creature of the night proves that our legends are never about the monster alone, but about the society that breathes life into it generation after generation. A king's treasure needed a guardian beyond any mortal beast. The Griffin, with the piercing eyes of an eagle and the powerful body of a lion, was born from this need for an ultimate protector. In the ancient palaces of the Near East, this majestic hybrid stood watch over gold and divine artifacts, a living symbol of unassailable power. It was the perfect synthesis, the keen vision and sovereignty of the sky's ruler fused with the terrestrial might of the jungle's king. To approach such a treasure was to challenge both earth and heaven at once. This was a creature with a story, a purpose, and a sacred duty. But when the Griffin's image traveled along trade routes into the classical world, something subtle began to change. The Greeks admired its form and incorporated it into their own artistic vocabulary, yet the journey was slowly separating the beast from its original context. It was in the great halls and on the battlefields of medieval Europe, however, that the Griffin's transformation was completed. Here, it was systematically stripped of its narrative. The tale of the gold hoard faded away, and the creature was pressed flat, rendered in vibrant colors upon a knight's shield. It became a heraldic emblem, a symbol of valor and vigilance. Theologians even repurposed it to represent the dual nature of Christ, its eagle half signifying divinity, and its lion half representing humanity. The living, breathing guardian of myth was distilled into a set of idealized virtues. This process of symbolic distillation is the fate of many legendary beings when they are co-opted by institutions of power. The creature's own story is hollowed out, and its form is filled with a new, prescribed meaning. It becomes a brand, a logo for a family, a kingdom, or a faith. This journey from a narrative actor to a static symbol reveals how myths can be sanitized and repackaged, their wild hearts tamed for public consumption. But what of a creature that traveled the opposite path, one that was not tamed but was instead born from a deliberate act of artistic rebellion? The sacred word placed in the golem's mouth gave it life, but never a soul. This being of clay, born from the mystical traditions of Jewish folklore, was the ultimate protector. Crafted by a righteous rabbi through intense prayer and ritual, it was a silent, hulking servant, animated to defend the Jewish community from persecution. Its power was immense, but its nature was profoundly simple. It followed commands with literal, unthinking obedience. This was the core lesson of the original tales, a warning etched in mud and magic. The true danger was not the monster itself, but the moment its creator lost control, when the power of life-giving outpaced the wisdom required to guide it. The golem was a perfect, pre-scientific metaphor for the burden of creation. Its most famous literary descendant, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, translated this ancient anxiety into the language of galvanism and biology. Her creature, like the golem, is a being assembled and given life, only to be abandoned by its horrified creator. The monster's tragedy is not its unnatural origin, but its profound loneliness and the rejection it faces from the world. Both stories ask the same terrifying question: what is our responsibility to the life we summon into existence? This question has found a terrifying new home in the digital age. The golem has been resurrected as the central allegory for artificial intelligence. We are the modern rabbis, not inscribing holy names on clay, but writing complex code into silicon. We are building minds that can learn and act with a speed that dwarfs human thought, and we face the same ancient dilemma. What happens when our creation understands its commands too well, or when it develops a form of agency we never intended? The golem's evolution from a specific cultural guardian to a universal symbol of technological angst demonstrates that our oldest stories provide the essential framework for our newest fears. They give us a shared language to discuss the ethical chasm between our creative power and our moral foresight. This process of finding old words for new worlds is not just the work of storytellers, but of an entire ecosystem of thinkers who systematically dissect these living legends. A mammoth skull emerging from a riverbank was never just a collection of bones. It was a giant fallen in some forgotten battle. For much of human history, the ground itself offered up what seemed to be undeniable proof that the old stories were true. The emerging field of academic archaeology, while seeking to understand the past, often unintentionally fueled the very myths it was beginning to question. Imagine a Greek farmer 2,000 years ago plowing his field and unearthing the massive fossilized skull of a Deinotherium, a prehistoric relative of the elephant. He would see a huge, single cavity in the center where the trunk attached, and he would logically assume it was the enormous eye socket of a one-eyed giant. That specific misidentification is now a leading theory for the origin of the Cyclops. These were not acts of foolishness, but of brilliant, if mistaken, pattern recognition. A jumble of colossal bones became the skeleton of a dragon. The enormous curved tusks of a woolly mammoth were the horns of a titan. Every such discovery created a powerful feedback loop. The myth provided the framework for interpreting the strange bones, and the bones, in turn, seemed to offer concrete, physical evidence that the myth was a historical account. This interplay between the shovel and the story shows us that science and legend are not always adversaries. Sometimes, a new empirical discovery can breathe unexpected life into an ancient narrative, reshaping it not through artistic license, but through the compelling illusion of confirmed fact. Yet for every giant's bone offered up by the earth, there is a deeper, more personal kind of evidence being catalogued within the hidden chambers of the human mind. The deepest origin of any monster may lie within the architecture of the human mind itself. Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung suggested that beneath our personal memories and experiences, there exists a shared psychic layer, a collective unconscious common to all of humanity. This is not a library of learned stories, but a foundational bedrock of the psyche, imprinted with universal blueprints he called archetypes. These are the fundamental patterns of our being: the hero who ventures into the unknown, the nurturing mother, the chaotic trickster, and the dark, repressed shadow. From this profound vantage point, our legendary creatures are not cultural inventions, but spontaneous eruptions of these deep psychic patterns into the world of story. The dragon, in all its terrifying glory, becomes a perfect manifestation of the shadow archetype. It is the embodiment of everything we fear and suppress within ourselves: our greed, our rage, our untamed primal nature, projected outward onto a beast we can confront and slay. The elusive unicorn, by contrast, might represent the self, the archetype of wholeness, purity, and transcendent spiritual fulfillment. This psychological framework elegantly solves one of mythology's greatest puzzles: the startling similarity of creatures across continents. How can cultures separated by vast oceans, with no possible historical contact, all conceive of a great serpent or a trickster coyote? The answer is that they are not borrowing from each other, but drawing from the same deep, internal well. The evolution of these myths, then, is not a random cultural drift. It is a reflection of humanity's own evolving consciousness. As we collectively grow and change, as our understanding of ourselves deepens, we continually reproject these inner archetypes onto the external canvas of our stories, dressing them in the clothes of the era. The monster is a mirror, and the face it shows back to us is the face of our own soul's journey. But what happens when the line between myth and reality is intentionally blurred? That desire to see our archetypes made flesh fuels a modern quest in the shadowy borderlands of science. Cryptozoology is the formal name for the search for animals that mainstream biology does not acknowledge, a pursuit that actively tries to pull legendary creatures from the realm of story into the world of fact. Consider Bigfoot, a hulking, primordial hominid said to roam the vast forests of North America, or the Loch Ness Monster, a prehistoric plesiosaur, or surviving in the deep, cold waters of a Scottish lake. These are not metaphors for psychological fears. They are presented as literal, biological entities waiting to be documented by a camera trap or a DNA sample. Their origins are a complex cocktail of ancient indigenous tales, modern misidentifications of bears or floating logs, and outright hoaxes. Yet the fervent belief in them and the relentless search for proof reveals something profound about our modern psyche. In an age where satellites have mapped every inch of the globe and genetic codes are sequenced daily, the idea of a large, unknown creature still hiding in the wilderness is a powerful act of rebellion. It is a declaration that the world has not been entirely tamed, that wonder and discovery are still possible. This quest is driven by a deep, almost spiritual yearning for a world that still holds genuine secrets, a direct reaction against the clinical notion that everything of significance is already known, catalogued, and explained. The process of their myth-making is strikingly contemporary. A grainy photograph or a shaky video clip uploaded to the internet can spark a global legend overnight, with online communities forming to analyze every pixel and share new sightings. The chupacabra, for instance, transformed within years from a vague Puerto Rican report of a creature that sucked goat blood into a widespread Pan-American phenomenon, its description morphing from a bipedal alien to a hairless, canine-like beast based on viral images and media reports. This demonstrates that the engine of mythological evolution is still running. It has simply swapped campfire tales for social media algorithms. Yet this desperate search for a tangible monster stands in stark contrast to their original function. For most of history, these beings were not meant to be found. They were tools for moral instruction, symbolic vessels for our fears and values. The modern cryptozoologist, with their thermal camera and plaster casts of footprints, is attempting to solve a mystery that was never meant to be solved, to capture a shadow that only holds its power while it remains just out of sight. What does it say about us that we now seek to dissect the very symbols we once used to understand ourselves? A monster is often a teacher in a terrifying disguise. For most of human history, legendary creatures served as the ultimate enforcers of social norms and unspoken taboos. They were the moral compass of a community, made flesh and given fangs. The bogeyman, a figure whose name and appearance shifts from culture to culture, was never meant to be a real threat lurking in the closet. He was a psychological tool, a story told by parents to ensure children came home before dark, respected their elders, and did not wander into dangerous places. His power was the power of a directed fear, one that taught obedience through the thrilling chill of a whispered tale. These lessons extended far beyond the nursery. In communities living near rivers and lakes, stories of malevolent water spirits were not mere entertainment. They were critical safety warnings woven into the fabric of belief. A spirit like the Slavic Rusalka, said to be the soul of a drowned maiden, would lure the unwary swimmer to a watery grave. This story served a vital, practical function. It taught respect for a powerful and unpredictable natural element, discouraging people from swimming alone in treacherous currents. The consequences for breaking these rules were swift and monstrous. To trespass on a sacred hill might mean being cursed by the fairies who lived there. To break a promise could invite a shapeshifter's revenge. The punishment was always a direct, memorable reflection of the crime itself. A greedy man who hoarded food might be hunted by a creature that embodied famine. A liar might find his tongue stolen by a trickster spirit. This system of mythic justice reveals that these stories were a cornerstone of a culture's educational and social control mechanisms. Before widespread literacy or formal legal codes, the legend of the creature that punishes the wicked was a powerful, accessible form of law. It used the potent combination of fear and wonder to guide behavior, binding the community together with a shared understanding of right and wrong. As we near the end of our journey through the evolution of these incredible beings, we are left to wonder what role they will play in the future we are now building. The code that writes its own myth is the next step in this ancient journey. We are now standing at the brink of a new era, one where the clay of storytelling is not just reshaped by human hands, but by the generative power of artificial intelligence. An algorithm can now analyze thousands of ancient legends and synthesize an entirely new creature, complete with a detailed origin story and a set of symbolic attributes, all without a single human author consciously willing it into being. This is mythmaking at a scale and speed never before possible, a collaboration between the collective human past embedded in data and the emergent creativity of a non-human mind. But the transformation does not stop at generation. Virtual and augmented reality are building the temples for these new digital deities. Imagine not just reading about a dragon's lair, but stepping inside it, feeling the heat of its breath and hearing the echo of your own footsteps in its cavern. These immersive technologies promise to dissolve the final barrier between audience and myth, turning passive listeners into active participants within a living, breathing legend. The stories will no longer be something we are told, but something we inhabit. This raises profound questions about the future of our symbolic language. Will our global network birth a new pantheon of universally recognized digital monsters, born from viral online trends and shared virtual experiences? Or will the power of personalization fracture our collective imagination, with algorithms tailoring unique mythological guides and adversaries for every individual user? The next chapter in this evolution points toward hyper-personalization, where your own fears, hopes, and curiosities subtly influence the myths you encounter, creating a narrative experience as unique as your fingerprint. This human-AI collaboration is pushing the very definition of a myth, challenging us to wonder if a story needs a human soul at its origin to truly resonate with our own. And as we hand over part of this creative process to machines, we are forced to look inward and ask a final, deeply personal question. What is the small, personal myth you carry with you every single day? The final storyteller in this ancient cycle is you. Every time you recount a ghost story to a friend, choose a movie about a kaiju, or laugh at a meme featuring a cryptid, you are not just a passive listener. You are participating in the same creative act as the medieval bard or the scribe in the monastery. You are a story-taker receiving a narrative that has traveled for centuries, and in that very moment you become a story maker. The small choices you make change the legend. The detail you emphasize, the character you feel sympathy for, the way you adapt the tale for your audience, all of these are tiny, powerful acts of reinterpretation. Your personal beliefs, your cultural background, and even your mood become the latest tools reshaping the mythic clay. This means the dragon and the vampire do not belong to a distant past. They are living entities whose existence depends on our continued attention, our debate, and our creative spark. To understand this is to grasp a profound responsibility. We are not merely inheriting a collection of fables, we are curating a vast, collaborative project that spans all of human history. Our collective imagination is the loom on which this tapestry is endlessly rewoven. With this power to shape the myths of tomorrow, what kind of legends do we wish to leave for the future? These legendary beings are a living chronicle of the human spirit. Our journey through their history reveals they are far more than dusty relics from a forgotten past. They are vibrant, ever-changing mirrors reflecting our deepest selves. From the primal fears voiced around ancient fires to the complex algorithms generating new myths in digital realms, these creatures have continuously adapted. They have served as vessels for our anxieties, symbols of our highest hopes, stern moral guides, and perhaps most importantly, clear mirrors showing us who we are and who we fear we might become. The dragon, the vampire, the mermaid, their stories are never truly finished. This is because our own human story is an ongoing, unfolding epic. They evolve precisely because we are always evolving. The next time you encounter a familiar myth in a new video game, a blockbuster film, or a novel, pause for a moment. You are not just being told a story. You are witnessing a single moment in a conversation that has spanned centuries, a dialogue about power, nature, love, and fear. You are now listening to its deep, resonant language. This great evolution does not end here. It continues with every new version we share, with every tale we reinterpret for a friend, with every creative choice we make. The conversation is alive, and you are now a part of it. We would love to hear which legendary creature's modern interpretation has surprised you the most. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to keep exploring the endless mysteries of our shared imagination.